A moving story of redemption, love, passions, and new beginnings. She was just a bet, but she became the punishment he will carry until the last day of his life. What started as a game of pride ended with a secret buried in tears, loss, and betrayal. Watch this story until the end. You will be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this. Continuing. She emerged as a silent presence, made of shadows and inconvenient truths, among the golden and empty halls of high society. Her name was Isabel, but no one knew her last name. She worked as a restorer of ancient manuscripts in the basement of the library, where time seemed to fall asleep among yellowed pages and forgotten secrets. No one there knew that she was running away, nor from whom, nor from what. She was just running away. Isabel's delicate hands glided over centuries-old pages with the reverence of someone touching sacred relics. In the humid silence of the basement, where only the hum of the air conditioning broke the stillness, she found a peace that did not exist anywhere on the surface. It was there, among documents that bore witness to the history of Brazil, that she could forget for a few hours the constant feeling of being watched. That Tuesday morning, while cataloguing a collection of 19th-century letters, Isabel didn't know that her life was about to change forever. She didn't know that 3 floors above, in the library's grand hall, a man was asking specifically for her. A man whose name was whispered in São Paulo's most exclusive circles, with a mixture of admiration and fear. Valentin Rocha was the antithesis of her introspection. A gaming and entertainment magnate, heir to a fortune built on illicit agreements, and a reputation built on charm and impunity. At 35, he commanded an empire that stretched from the floating casinos of the São Francisco River to the clandestine gambling houses hidden in the rooftops of Jardins. His gaze was a pact, his touch an addiction, but inside he was a hollow man, condemned to repeat the tragedy of his father, who had been found dead in the casino itself with a letter that said, "Everything has a price, even love." The first time Isabel saw him was during a charity event at the Copacabana Palace, where an exhibition of rare manuscripts was raising funds for the preservation of Brazil's historical heritage. She was there on business, explaining to bored socialites the importance of a letter from Dom Pedro II, when she felt a gaze burning into her back. She turned and found herself staring into the most disturbing eyes she'd ever seen. It wasn't just the color, a brown so dark it bordered on black, but the intensity with which he watched her, as if he could read every page of her soul the way she read ancient manuscripts. The man was leaning against the wall, a drink in his hand, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. Tall, broad-shouldered, with black hair slicked back in calculated defiance. There was something wild about him, barely contained by the elegance of his clothes and his studied posture. Isabel quickly looked away, but she could feel him still watching her. All night, as she walked among the guests talking about the importance of historical preservation, she felt his presence like a burn on her skin. When she finally headed to the bathroom to escape for a few minutes, she found him waiting in the hallway. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his deep voice heavy with a soft Rio accent, "but I have to confess that I'm fascinated by your work." Isabel studied him warily. Up close, he was even more disturbing. There was a small scar on the left corner of his mouth which gave his smile a dangerous air. And his eyes seemed to hold secrets that could destroy worlds. "Thank you," she replied curtly, trying to sidestep him. He moved slightly, blocking her path without appearing threatening. "Valentin Rocha," he said, extending his hand. "And you must be Isabel Santos, the restaurateur everyone is talking about." She hesitated before shaking his hand. The touch was electric, a current that shot up her arm and exploded in her chest. She released his hand quickly, as if she had touched a red-hot iron. "Does everyone talk?" he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. "In academia, yes. They say you have magic hands, that you can bring manuscripts back from the dead." He smiled, but there was something predatory in the expression. "I have a proposition for you." Isabel felt all the alarm bells going off in her mind. She knew this kind of man. The kind who was used to getting whatever he wanted, no matter the price. The kind her mother had taught her to avoid before she died in that suspicious fire 10 years ago. "I'm not interested," she said, trying to walk past him again. This time Valentine pulled away, but his words followed her like a dart. "Promise. You will stay." Isabel spent the following weeks trying to forget the encounter, but it was impossible. Valentine Rocha had infiltrated her thoughts like ink on porous paper. She researched him on the internet and didn't like what she found. Heir to a family with suspicious connections, investigated multiple times by the federal police but never convicted, involved in scandals that always died in the press before gaining traction. He was exactly the kind of man she should run away from. But then he appeared in the library. It was a grey Thursday when Isabel went downstairs to get a reference book and found him chatting animatedly with the library director. He was wearing dark jeans and a white linen shirt, a more casual but no less striking look. The director, Mrs. Marta, was visibly moved. "Isabel, my dear," the woman called. "Come meet our new patron. Mr. Rocha is donating 2 million reais to the manuscript digitization project." Valentine's smile, when their eyes met, was utterly devilish. He had bought her approach, literally. Isabel felt a mixture of anger and something dangerously close to admiration. Few men would have the audacity to do something like that. "Miss Santos," he said, extending his hand again, "what a pleasure to meet you again." This time, Isabel had no choice but to shake his hand. In front of the principal. Again that electric shock. Again the feeling of playing with fire. "Miss Santos will be responsible for overseeing the use of the donation," Mrs. Marta continued, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. "I'm sure you two will work very well together." For the next 2 hours, Isabel was forced to show Valentine around the facility, explain the restoration process, and detail how the money would be spent. He asked thoughtful questions, demonstrated genuine knowledge of historic preservation, and treated the staff with respect. At times, Isabel almost forgot who he was. Almost. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked, when they were alone in the basement, surrounded by shelves that held centuries of Brazilian history. Valentine stopped poring over a colonial manuscript and looked at her. Here, in the golden gloom of the old lights, he looked even more dangerous, and infinitely more seductive. "Maybe I have a genuine interest in historic preservation," he said, slowly approaching. "Or maybe you're a man who's used to buying whatever he wants." Isabel crossed her arms, trying to create a barrier between them. "And you think I'm trying to buy her?" There was amusement in his voice, but also something darker. "Don't you think?" Valentine stopped just inches from her. Isabel could feel the heat of his body, the scent of his cologne, something masculine and expensive that made her head spin. She could see the details of his face, the thick eyelashes, the stubble that gave him a dangerous look, the way his lips curved into a smile that promised delicious sins. "Isabel," he said, his voice low as an intimate whisper, "if I wanted to buy you, I would offer much more than 2 million. Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving her trembling, in the middle of the bookshelves. But his words echoed in the air like a promise or a threat. From that day on, Valentine became a constant presence at the library. He would show up unannounced, always with some plausible excuse. He wanted to check on the progress of the project. He had doubts about the use of the funds. He wanted to learn more about the collection. Dona Marta was delighted with the benefactor's interest, but Isabel knew there was something more behind these visits. He was hunting, and she was the prey. The problem was that with each encounter, Isabel felt less like prey and more like hunter. There was something about Valentine that aroused a dangerous curiosity. Behind his facade of a millionaire playboy, she saw layers of complexity that intrigued her. There were moments when he seemed genuinely lost, as if he were searching for something that even he didn't know what it was. Like the afternoon he found him alone in the colonial history section, holding a document about slavery in Brazil with an expression of deep melancholy. "My great-grandmother was a slave," he said without looking up, as if he were talking to himself. Freed by the lei aurea, but never truly free. She died poor, illiterate, invisible to history. He looked up at Isabel. Sometimes I wonder if all this wealth isn't just a way to make up for what was stolen from her. Isabel felt something move in her chest, a crack in the defenses she had. Pilt, the official story always leaves out the voices that needed to be heard most, she said softly. Yes? Valentin placed the document carefully on the table. And you are returning these voices to the world. It is noble work. Why do I get the impression that you don't do anything out of nobility? Isabel regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. They were too cruel, even for someone who suspected her intentions. But Valentin just smiled, a sad smile that made her want to take back everything she had said. Because you are too intelligent to believe in fairy tales, he replied. And you are right. I do nothing. Out of nobility. I do everything out of self-interest. And what is your interest in me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Valentin stood, walking around the table until he stood before her. This time, Isabel didn't back away. There was something about the vulnerability he'd shown that kept her from running away. Do you really want to know? He asked, his voice hoarse. Isabel nodded, not trusting her own voice. You're the first woman who's ever said no to me. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. The first one who's ever looked at me like she could see through all the lies I've built. The first one who's ever made me want to be someone other than who I am. The kiss came like a storm, violent, desperate, filled with a hunger that seemed to have been building for years. Isabel should have pulled away, should have pushed him away, should have kept her defenses up. Instead, she found herself responding with equal intensity, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally pulled apart, they were both panting. Valentin rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if in pain. This is crazy, Isabel whispered. I know. He opened his eyes, and she saw a storm of emotions there that frightened her. But I can't stop. Neither do I, she admitted, and in doing so, she knew she had sealed her fate. They parted that day without another word, but they both knew that something irreversible had happened. Isabel spent the entire night awake, touching her lips, still swollen from the kiss, trying to understand how she had allowed her defenses to crumble so completely. Valentin, meanwhile, drove through the city until dawn, Marcel's words echoing. In his mind, make her fall in love, make her confess it and then disappear, like her father did when he destroyed our empire. He had accepted the bet out of pride, out of ill-explained revenge, out of inherited rage. But now, with the taste of Isabel still on his lips, and the echo of her confession still in his ears, Valentin was beginning to understand that he had completely underestimated the power of the game he had entered into. It wasn't just Isabel who was in danger of falling in love. The next morning, when Isabel arrived at the library, she found an envelope on her desk with no return address. Inside was a single black rose and a card with a phrase handwritten in elegant script. Some manuscripts only reveal their secrets to those who have the courage to read between the lines. She knew immediately who had sent it, and she knew that her orderly, sheltered life had come to an end. The game had begun, and she had no idea that she was being played as much as he was. The days that followed the kiss were exquisite torture. Isabel tried to maintain her routine, arriving early at the library, immersing herself in the manuscripts as if they could protect her from the storm that Valentin had unleashed in her life. But it was useless. Every shadow in the hallway made her heart race. Every sound of footsteps made her look up, expecting to see that tall, imposing figure. Valentin hadn't shown up for 3 days. 3 long days in which Isabel had teetered between relief and an anxiety that made her angry with herself. She shouldn't be missing him. She shouldn't be checking her phone constantly, waiting for a message that never came. She shouldn't be dreaming about those dark eyes every night. On Thursday, when she finally saw him again, it was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. He was in the main hall talking to Donna Marta about the technical details of the digitization project, but his eyes met Isabel's across the stairwell. The connection was instant, electric, unsettling. Isabel walked down the stairs, trying, to look casual, but she could feel his gaze following her every move. As she approached, Valentine interrupted the conversation mid-sentence. "Miss Marta, would you mind if I spoke to Miss Santos for a moment about the 18th century manuscripts?" The director, always solicitous of the generous donor, nodded promptly and walked away. Isabel and Valentine were left alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by other employees and visitors, but completely isolated in their own bubble of tension. "You were avoiding me," he said without preamble, his voice low but filled with an intensity that made Isabel shiver. "No, I was working." She kept her tone professional, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Liar." Valentine took a step closer, almost imperceptibly. "You missed me." The blunt statement completely disarmed her. Isabel opened her mouth to deny it, but the words died in her throat when she saw the certainty in his eyes. He knew. He knew that she had spent those 3 days thinking about him, wishing he would show up, hating herself for this weakness. "What do you want from me, Valentine?" The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. "Have dinner with me tonight." It wasn't a request, it was almost an order, spoken with the confidence of someone used to having his wishes granted. "I can't." "Why not?" Isabel searched for a plausible excuse, but her mind was blank. The truth was that she couldn't, because she knew that having dinner with him would be crossing a line from which there would be no return. It would be accepting to enter into the dangerous game he proposed. "Because you're dangerous," he said finally with brutal honesty. Valentine smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was dark, full of dark promises. "I am, and you like it." Before Isabel could respond, he leaned closer, whispering in her ear, "Fasano restaurant, 8 o'clock. If you don't show up, I'll come get you." And then he walked away, leaving her, trembling in the middle of the hall like a hurricane that had passed and moved on. Isabel spent the rest of the day trying to convince herself that she wouldn't go. She repeated to herself all the reasons why getting involved with Valentine Rocha would be a catastrophic mistake. He was rich, powerful, used to getting whatever he wanted. She was a simple restaurateur, the daughter of working-class people, without the necessary defenses to deal with men like him. Besides, there was something dark about his reputation, whispers of illicit dealings that reminded her of her mother's warnings about dangerous men. But at 7:30 in the evening, she found herself in front of her wardrobe, choosing a simple but elegant black dress. At 8 o'clock sharp, she was in front of Fasano, her heart beating like an out-of-time drum. Valentine was waiting for her at the bar, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that highlighted his devastatingly masculine beauty. When he saw her, he stood up with the predatory grace of a feline and approached her. He kissed her hand delicately, an old-fashioned formal gesture that, coming from him, seemed intimate and provocative. "I knew you would come," he said, guiding her to a reserved table in a discreet corner of the restaurant. "How could I be so sure?" "Because you're like me. You can't resist danger." His eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel naked. "And because there's something between us that's stronger than logic." Dinner was an elaborate dance of seduction and resistance. Valentine proved to be a brilliant conversationalist, knowledgeable about art, history, and literature. He talked about his travels around the world, about the books he loved, about his passion for historical preservation, which, Isabel discovered, was genuine. For moments, she almost forgot the warnings in her mind. "Tell me about yourself," he said when they had finished their main course, "about your family, your childhood." Isabel hesitated. Her personal history was dangerous territory, full of pain she preferred to keep buried. "There's not much to tell. I lost my mother when I was 15. I was raised by my grandmother in Minas Gerais. And your father?" The question struck like a blade. Isabel felt her face automatically close. "I've never met him." Valentine tilted, his head studying her reaction. That must have been difficult. It was. She took a sip of wine, trying to drown out the memories. "My mother was very secretive about him. She would only say that he was a great love that ended badly." Something passed over Valentine's face. A shadow, a sudden tension that disappeared so quickly, Isabel almost thought she had imagined it. "What about you? Tell me about your family," she said, taking the focus off herself. "My father died when I was 20, Valentine said, his voice deepening. "Sudden death. Heart attack, according to the doctors, but I always suspected there was more to it." "Why?" Valentine twirled his wineglass between his fingers, lost in dark memories. He was investigating some irregularities in the family. Business. He said he had discovered something about the past, about how the fortune had really been built. The night he died, he called me and said he had to tell me the truth about everything. He never did. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something familiar about the story, something that echoed fragmented memories of conversations her mother had on the phone in the last months of her life. Whispered conversations about investigations, about dangerous truths that needed to come to light. Did you ever find out what he had found? A few fragments, old documents, questionable contracts, connections to people who preferred to remain in the shadows. Valentine stared at her intently. "My family did not make its fortune, honestly, Isabel, and I have lived with the consequences of that ever since." The brutal honesty of his confession surprised her. Men like Valentine often hid their secrets, especially from women they barely knew. Why was he being so transparent? "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know who you're having dinner with, and because—" He hesitated, as if struggling with something internal. "Because it's been a long time since I've met someone I can be honest with." The rest of dinner passed in a mix of deep conversation and subtle, but constant flirting. Valentine was magnetic, seductive without being vulgar, intelligent without being arrogant. Isabel found herself laughing at his jokes, leaning closer when he spoke, allowing their fingers to brush as he passed the salt. When they left the restaurant, the São Paulo night enveloped them with its blanket of lights and movement. Valentine offered her a ride, but Isabel hesitated. Getting into his car would be crossing another line, allowing an intimacy that frightened her. "I'm not going to try anything," he said, reading her hesitation. "I just want to make sure you get home safely." Against her better judgment, Isabel accepted. Valentine's car was a black Porsche, luxurious but understated. The interior smelled of leather and his masculine cologne, a combination that made her head spin. During the journey, they spoke little. The sexual tension in the air was almost palpable, full of unexplored possibilities. When they arrived at Tai, Isabel's modest building in Vila Madalena, she felt almost disappointed. "Thanks for dinner," she said, her hand already on the doorknob. "Isabel," his voice stopped her. "Look at me." She turned and found those dark eyes burning with an intensity that made her heart race. "This isn't going to end here," he said, his voice husky with barely contained desire. "You know that, don't you?" Isabel couldn't answer. She just nodded, mesmerized by the certainty in his voice. "Good night," he whispered, but made no move to get out of the car until she was safely in the building. That night, Isabel could barely sleep. She tossed and turned, reliving every moment of dinner, every glance, every casual touch. There was something addictive about Valentine, something that made her want more, even though she knew she should run away. The next morning, he found another envelope on his desk. This time there was no rose, just a card with an address and a time. "Galleria Fortes Vilaça, today 7 p.m. I want to show you something." Isabel stared at the card for long minutes, knowing that to go would be to give herself completely to the game he was proposing. But curiosity, and if she was honest with herself, the desire to see him again, was stronger than prudence. The gallery was in the middle of an exhibition opening when Isabel arrived. The space was buzzing with São Paulo's cultural elite, glasses of champagne and sophisticated conversations about contemporary art. She felt out of place in her simple dress, but soon spotted Valentine at the back of the gallery. He stood before a painting, completely absorbed. As she approached, Isabel saw that it was a disturbing portrait, a young woman with eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of the world, surrounded by shadows that could be protection or prison. "It's her," Valentine said without turning around. My sister, Valentina. Isabel studied the painting more closely. There was something familiar about the woman's face, a subtle resemblance to Valentine that went beyond the physical features. She disappeared when she was 15, he continued, his voice thick with old pain. We never found her. We never knew if she ran away, if she was kidnapped, if... He didn't finish the sentence. I'm sorry, Isabel said, lightly touching his arm. She was like you in a way, smart, independent, determined to make her own way. She hated the life our father had built for us. Valentine finally turned to face her. Sometimes I wonder if she wasn't right. Valentine, come with me, he said abruptly, taking her hand. There's something else I want to show you. They left the gallery and Valentine drove through the night streets of São Paulo until they reached an old building in the city center. They climbed to the top floor, where a modest but elegant penthouse revealed a spectacular view of the city. It's my refuge, Valentine explained, pouring wine into 2 glasses. The one place where I can be myself, away from all the show. The apartment was surprisingly simple, decorated with books, art and photographs that told the story of a man far more complex than his public facade suggested. Isabel walked through the space, touching personal objects, reading book titles, trying to understand the layers of the man who had brought her there. Why did you bring me here? He finally asked. Valentine was leaning against the window, watching her explore his intimate space. Because I want you to know me, the real me, not the version I show to the world. And why is this important? He approached slowly, as if he was approaching a wild animal that could run away at any moment. Because you're important. The confession hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither of them was ready to fully face. Isabel felt her heart race, all her defenses crumbling at the raw vulnerability in his eyes. Valentine, I can't, she began, but the words died when he reached up to gently touch her face. Can't what? He whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek. Falling in love with you. The admission slipped out before she could stop it, raw and honest. Why not? Because you will destroy me. There was certainty in his voice, as if he were prophesying an inevitable future. Valentine closed his eyes as if the words were a physical pain. When he opened them again, Isabel saw an internal battle there that she could not fully understand. What if I told you that you can destroy me too? The kiss that followed was different from the first. It wasn't violent or desperate. It was slow, exploratory, and filled with a tenderness that made tears burn in Isabel's eyes. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, as if she could merge their bodies and souls into one. When they broke apart, they were both panting. Valentine rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the tiny space between their faces. Stay, he begged, his voice husky with desire and something deeper. Just tonight, just to sleep, I promise. Isabel knew she should say no. She knew that to stay would be to cross the line, to give herself completely to a man she had admitted was dangerous. But when she looked into his eyes and saw there not just desire, but a loneliness that mirrored her own, she couldn't refuse. Just for sleeping, she repeated, laying down the rule they both knew would be difficult to enforce. Valentine led her to his bedroom, an intimate space dominated by a king-size bed and more personal photographs. He lent her one of his shirts to sleep in, turning his back while she changed. The gentlemanly gesture surprised her and somehow turned her on even more. They lay on the bed, keeping a respectful distance, but the tension was almost unbearable. Isabel could feel the heat of his body, hear his controlled breathing, feel the internal struggle he was waging to keep his promise. Tell me about your mother, he said into the darkness, clearly trying to distract himself. She was a teacher, Isabel replied, grateful for the distraction. She taught history in public schools all her life. She said that education was the only real way to change the world. How did she die? Isabel hesitated. It was a question that had been plaguing her for 10 years. A house fire. The investigators said it was accidental, a problem with the electrical wiring. But my mother was always careful about these things. And in the weeks before she died, She was acting strangely. Nervous, looking over her shoulder, making whispered calls. Valentine turned in bed to face her. In the dim light, she could only see the outline of his face. "Do you think it was on purpose?" "I was too young to be sure of anything. But yes, I always suspected there was something more." Isabel closed her eyes, trying to push away the painful memories. She was investigating something. She was talking about old injustices, about truths that needed to come to light. And then she died. Yes. They were silent for a while, both lost in their own pain. Finally, Valentine reached out and intertwined his fingers with hers. "We both carry ghosts," he said softly. "Yes," Isabel agreed. "Maybe that's why we understand each other. Or maybe that's why we're dangerous to each other." His words echoed in the darkness like a dark prophecy. But when Isabel finally fell asleep, it was with her fingers intertwined with his, feeling simultaneously safer and more vulnerable than she had ever felt before. She didn't know that across town, Marcel Rocha was meeting with two men in suits in a shadowy office, discussing the latest developments in the plan. "He's getting too involved," one of the men said, flipping through photographs of Valentine and Isabel leaving the restaurant. "I know," Marcel replied, lighting an expensive cigar. "My cousin has always been too sentimental, but that could work to our advantage. The more involved he is, the more devastating it will be when he finds out the truth about who she really is." "What if he finds out about the bet?" Marcel smiled, a cruel expression that didn't reach his eyes. "You won't find out, and even if you do, it will be too late. The plan will already be in motion, and Eduardo Santos's daughter will finally pay for her father's sins." The photographs on the table showed not only Valentine and Isabel, but also old documents, birth certificates, newspaper clippings about the fire that had killed Isabel's mother. And in the middle of it, all an old photo of a man who looked surprisingly like Isabel, Eduardo Santos, a former partner of the Rocha family, who had disappeared 20 years earlier, taking with him secrets that could destroy an empire. The net was closing in, and neither lover knew they were walking straight into the center of a web of revenge woven decades ago. Isabel woke up to the São Paulo sun filtering through the curtains of Valentine's room, his body warming her back in a way that should have alarmed her, but instead made her feel completely at peace for the first time in years. During the night, without either of them realizing it, they had become intertwined like two souls who had finally found their place in the world. Valentine was still asleep, his relaxed face losing all the tension and predatory air it had when awake. He looked younger, almost vulnerable. Isabel resisted the urge to touch the small scar at the corner of his mouth, afraid of waking him and breaking that moment of perfect tranquility. She tried to pull away carefully, but his arms tightened around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He murmured something incomprehensible against her neck, his hot breath sending goosebumps across her skin. "Good morning," he whispered, his sleep-roughened voice filled with an intimacy that made Isabel's heart race. "Good morning." She turned in his arms, finding those dark eyes already alert, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "Don't you regret it?" Valentine asked, an unexpected vulnerability seeping into his voice. "Should I?" She gently touched his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "Probably." He captured her hand, kissing her palm. "I'm not a good man, Isabel. And I'm not some naive woman who believes in fairy tales." She leaned closer, her lips almost touching his. "But for some crazy reason, I can't bring myself to care." The kiss that followed was slow, exploratory, filled with a tenderness that contrasted completely with the intensity of their previous encounters. When they separated, they were both panting, and Isabel saw something in his eyes that frightened her, the reflection of her own feelings deepening in a dangerous way. They had breakfast on the apartment's small balcony, São Paulo stretching out before them like an urban sea of possibilities and dangers. Valentine had prepared strong Brazilian coffee and sugar bread, a domestic care that contrasted with his public image as a millionaire playboy. "Do you cook?" Isabel asked, surprised by the normality of the moment. "My grandmother taught me that before she died. She said that a man who didn't know how to take care of himself didn't know how to take care of anyone else. He smiled, but there was melancholy in his expression. She was the only person in my family who always told me the truth, even when it hurt. What did she say? That bearing other people's sins only worked up to the point where you started to believe they were your own. Valentine sipped his coffee, lost in memories, that there would come a day when I would have to choose between family loyalty and my own soul. Isabel felt a shiver, as if those words were a prophecy that somehow included her. "And have you already made that choice?" Valentine stared at her intently. "I'm doing it now." After breakfast, Valentine insisted on driving her home so she could change before work. During the drive, she found herself noticing the details, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, the way his eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, the way he seemed constantly alert for potential threats. It was the behavior of someone accustomed to living dangerously. "Valentine," she said as they pulled up in front of her building, "what do you actually do, besides casinos and cultural investments?" He turned off the engine and turned, to face her fully. "Are you sure you want to know?" "Yes." Valentine sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My family controls a network of establishments that operate in a legal gray area. High-end gambling houses, where politicians and businessmen go to bet amounts that could buy entire cities. A place where information is currency and where secrets are traded like commodities. This is dangerous. Extremely and profitable." He touched her face gently. "That's why I hesitated before approaching you. Because anyone close to me automatically becomes a target. A target for who? Politicians who want to keep inconvenient information quiet, businessmen who have made fortunes through questionable methods, very powerful people who have a lot to lose if their secrets get out." Valentine studied her carefully. "Do you still want to continue?" Isabel should have said no. Every rational fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to return to her safe, orderly life among ancient manuscripts. But when she looked into his eyes and saw there not only danger, but also a desperate need for real connection, she couldn't pull away. "Yes," he said simply. The smile Valentine gave her was devastating, a mix of relief, desire, and something that felt dangerously like love. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Valentine and Isabel saw each other as often as possible, each encounter deepening their connection in a way that they both found simultaneously natural and frightening. He showed up at the library frequently, always with some excuse related to the digitization project, but Isabel knew it was just to see her. Over the next few weeks, Valentine took her to see a side of São Paulo she had never seen before. Hidden. Restaurants where the elite gathered after work, underground art galleries where controversial works were displayed away from the general public, private clubs where the normal rules of society did not apply. It was a seductive and dangerous world, where power was the currency and where Valentine moved with the ease of someone born to it. Isabel felt both fascinated and out of place, like an anthropologist studying an ancient and deadly tribe. "You don't have to like this," Valentine said one night, after a particularly tense dinner where she had witnessed a negotiation that clearly involved political blackmail. "I can keep that part of my life away from you." "No," Isabel held her hand tightly. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right. I want to know all sides of who you are." It was during this time that their encounters became more physically intense. The sexual tension that had been building since their first kiss finally exploded. On a rainy Thursday night, when Valentine showed up at her apartment soaking wet and desperate. "I've had a terrible day," he said, leaning against the closed door. "I found out that someone is leaking information about our business. I may have to make decisions that will destroy lives." Isabel stepped closer, gently touching his rain-wet face. "So, don't think about that now. Just for tonight. Just be Valentine. Not the heir, not the businessman, not the man with impossible responsibilities, just you." What happened next was inevitable. They gave themselves to each other with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if through passion they could temporarily forget the complicated worlds they came from. It was rough and tender, violent and delicate, a dance of souls recognizing each other on a primal level. Afterwards, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Valentine traced invisible patterns on Isabel's skin with his fingertips. "I've never felt like this before," he confessed in the darkness, "like it's possible to be a different person." "As if it were possible to be who you really are," she corrected. "Maybe it's the same thing." It was then that Isabel knew, with a clarity that terrified her, that she was madly in love. Not with the dangerous, powerful man the world saw, but with the vulnerable, lost man he allowed only her to know. But not everything was perfect in the paradise they were building. There were times when Valentine seemed distant, lost in thoughts he didn't share, phone calls that made him tense, whispered conversations that he interrupted when she approached. Isabel tried not to be bothered, remembering his warnings about the danger of their world, but a small seed of doubt began to grow. Things came to a head one Saturday night when Isabel decided to surprise him by showing up at his apartment unannounced. She had the key he had given her the week before, a gesture of trust that had made her feel specially chosen. When he opened the door, he found Valentine on the phone, speaking quietly but clearly agitated. "I can't go on like this, Marcel," he said, his back to the door. "Things have changed." Isabel hesitated at the entrance, something in the tone of her voice warning her not to announce herself yet. "Yes, I know what the deal was," Valentine continued, running his free hand through his hair in frustration. "But she's not what we thought. She's—" A long pause during which Isabel could hear the blood pounding in her ears. "No, you don't understand. I fell in love with her." The confession came out as if it had been forced out. "Really, this isn't a game anymore." The relief Isabel felt upon hearing those words was quickly replaced by confusion and a beginning of panic when Marcel replied something that made Valentine curse under his breath. "I know what her father did, Marcel. But she had nothing to do with it. She didn't even know who he really was." Valentine turned around and Isabel had to quickly hide behind the door. "I won't destroy an innocent woman for the sake of a revenge that isn't even mine." Isabel felt the world begin to spin around her. Her father, revenge. What was Valentine talking about? And why was he talking about her as if she were part of some plan? "The deal is off," Valentine said firmly. "Find another way to get the Aurora shares. Isabel is out of this." The call ended and Isabel heard footsteps approaching the door. She panicked, deciding to run away before he discovered her there. But when she turned around quickly, she bumped into a vase that fell to the floor with a crash. "Who's there?" Valentine's voice sounded alert. Dangerous. There was no hiding it. Isabel stepped out from behind the door, trying to look casual, as if she had just arrived. "It's me," he said, forcing a smile. "I thought I'd surprise you." Valentine studied her carefully, his eyes searching for signs that she had heard their conversation. "How long have you been there?" "I just got here. Why?" Isabel hated the lie, but she needed time to process what she had heard. "You're welcome." Valentine leaned closer, kissing her lightly. What a nice surprise. But Isabel could feel the tension in his body, the way his eyes studied her as if searching for cracks in her facade. They spent the rest of the night together, but there was a new layer of wariness between them, as if they were both hiding secrets that could destroy everything. For the next week, Isabel couldn't concentrate on anything. Valentine's words echoed constantly in her mind. I know what her father did. A revenge that isn't even mine. The deal is off. What deal? What revenge? And what did her father, whom she didn't even know, have to do with any of this? He decided to investigate on his own. He began quietly, searching through the library archives for information about his own family. He discovered that his original birth certificate had been altered. His father's name had been removed and replaced with not given. But on an old copy that had been filed incorrectly, he found his original name, Eduardo Santos. The name didn't ring a bell, but a deeper search on the internet revealed a disturbing story. Eduardo Santos had been a partner in an investment firm in the 1990s, a company that had been destroyed by a money laundering and corruption scandal. His main partner, Roberto Rocha, Valentine's father. The revelation hit her like a punch in the gut. Her father had been a partner of Valentine's father, and from what she could gather from old reports, Eduardo Santos had mysteriously disappeared shortly after the scandal broke, taking with him evidence that could have exonerated Roberto Rocha. It all began to make horrible sense. Valentine's approach had not been accidental. The donation to the library, the sudden interest in manuscripts, even their first meeting at the fundraiser, it had all been planned. But planned for what? Revenge? And what was that deal he had cancelled over the phone? Isabel spent 3 days processing the information, trying to decide what to do. Confront him directly, pretend she knew nothing, run away before it was too late? The decision was made for her when, on Thursday night, she found Marcel Rocha waiting for her at the library door. He was older than Valentin, maybe 45, with grey hair slicked back and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was wearing an expensive suit and holding a manila envelope. "Miss Santos," he said, approaching with the confidence of a predator. "My name is Marcel Rocha. I think we need to talk." "I have nothing to talk to you about," Isabel replied, trying to get around him. "Oh, but there is." Marcel blocked his path. "Especially about your relationship with my cousin Valentine, and about certain information I have about your father." Isabel felt her blood run cold in her veins. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Marcel held out the envelope. "Eduardo Santos, your father, the man who destroyed my family and then ran away like a coward." Against her will, Isabel took the envelope. Inside were old photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, and in the middle of it all a photo of a young man who looked surprisingly like her. "Your father stole $15 million from the Rocha family company," Marcel continued, his voice as cold as ice. "Money that was supposed to pay off debts. To very dangerous people. My uncle died because of it, hunted by creditors who wanted the family's blood. This has nothing to do with me," Isabel said, but her voice was shaky. "It's perfectly related. You're his daughter, and now you're repeating your father's sins, seducing my cousin to gain access to our business." Marcel leaned closer. "But I know exactly who you are, and I know Valentine has no idea." "He knows who I am," Isabel lied. "You really know?" Marcel smiled cruelly. "Then why didn't you tell him that you met because of a bet, that your initial approach was a planned revenge, that this all started as a game?" Isabel's world had completely fallen apart. A bet. Valentine had approached her because of a bet. It had all been a lie from the beginning. "I see he didn't tell you," Marcel said, pleased by the devastation on her face. "Want to know the details? The bet was simple. Make you fall in love with him and then disappear, like your father did. In exchange, he would receive full control of the family casinos." Isabel felt nausea rising in her throat. "I don't believe you." "You don't have to believe me." Marcel took his cell phone out of his pocket. "I can show you the recordings of the conversations where we planned everything, or you can just ask him. What do you want from me? Disappear from his life, forever, just like your father should have done 20 years ago." Marcel put away the phone. "Do that, and I'll make sure certain information about the fire that killed your mother stays buried." The threat was like a blade piercing his heart. "What are you insinuating? Your mother was investigating your father's disappearance when she died, wasn't she? Asking inconvenient questions, trying to clear his name." Marcel stepped closer. Fires can be very convenient for silencing overly curious people. Isabel recoiled as if she had been physically struck. "You killed my mother." "I didn't kill anyone, but accidents happen to people who interfere in matters they shouldn't." Marcel straightened his jacket. "You have 48 hours to disappear from my cousin's life. Otherwise, you might end up suffering the same kind of accident as your mother." And then he walked away, leaving Isabel trembling on the sidewalk, holding the envelope that contained the wreckage of everything she had ever believed in. That night, when Valentine showed up at her apartment as he always did, Isabel could barely look at him. She could see the farce behind every smile, the manipulation behind every affection. It had all been a lie. Every moment of happiness, every intimate confession, every touch. It had all been part of a cruel game of revenge. "You're acting strange," Valentine said, touching her face with concern. "Is something wrong?" For a moment, Isabel wanted to tell everything. She wanted to scream, cry, demand explanations. But then she remembered Marcel's threats, the possibility that her mother had been murdered for getting too close to the truth, and she knew that her only option was to run away. "I'm just tired," she lied, allowing him to hold her, hating herself for still feeling her heart race at his touch. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" "No." The word came out harsher than he intended. "I need to sleep." Valentine studied her for a moment, clearly sensing that something was wrong. But he didn't insist. He kissed her gently and left, not knowing that it would be the last time he saw her for months. As soon as he left, Isabel began planning her escape. She would take her savings, leave São Paulo, and start a new life away from everything and everyone. It was the only way to protect herself and, ironically, to protect Valentine from his own family. But before he left, there was one thing he needed to do. One last investigation into his mother's death. If he was going to disappear forever, at least he could take the truth with him. The next morning, Isabel didn't show up for work. Her apartment was empty, with no signs of a struggle, but also no signs of a planned move. She had simply disappeared as if she had never existed. When Valentine discovered 3 days later that she had disappeared without a trace, he felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He searched desperately for her, hired investigators, and searched every corner of São Paulo. It was only when he found, hidden among the manuscripts on his desk in the library, an unsigned letter that he understood the magnitude of what he had lost. Some truths are discovered too late. You lost me before you even had me. Forever. And somewhere in the interior of Minas Gerais, in a small town where no one asked questions, Isabel cried every night for a love that had been real, only for her. 3 months had passed since Isabel's disappearance, and Valentine Rocha had become a shadow of the man he once was. His employees whispered in the hallways about the dramatic changes in his behavior, the sleepless nights, the sudden fits of rage, the compulsive obsession with finding a woman who had simply vanished from the face of the earth. São Paulo continued. Its frenetic dance of business and power. But for Valentine, the world had lost all color. He had hired the best private investigators in the country, bribed police officers, pressured contacts in the federal government. Every lead led to a dead end. It was as if Isabel Santos had never existed. On a rainy Thursday morning, Valentine was in his office on the top floor of the building that housed his legal business when he received the call that would change everything. It was Ricardo, his most competent private investigator. "Mr. Rocha, I need to see you urgently. I found out something about the girl you're looking for, something you'll want to hear in person." An hour later, Ricardo was sitting at Valentine's desk, a thick envelope in his hands and a serious expression on his face. He was a man in his 50s, a former federal police officer who had opened his own agency after retiring. If there was something Ricardo couldn't find, it was because it didn't exist. "Mr. Rocha, before I show you what I discovered, I need to ask you a question." Ricardo leaned forward. "Are you sure you want to know the truth about Isabel Santos? Because what I found will change everything." "Speak," Valentine said, his voice hoarse from weeks of not sleeping properly. Ricardo opened the envelope and spread documents on the table. Birth certificates, police reports, old photographs, newspaper clippings yellowed with age. "Isabel Santos is not only Eduardo Santos's daughter," Ricardo began. "She is also the granddaughter of Helena Santos, the woman who exposed the Rocha family's first money laundering schemes in the 1970s. Eduardo did not steal $15 million, Mr. Rocha. He discovered that he was being used as a front for illegal operations and tried to expose the truth." Valentine felt his blood run, cold in his veins. "What are you saying?" "I'm telling you that your cousin Marcel lied about everything." Ricardo pointed to a series of bank documents. Eduardo Santos deposited the entire $15 million in an escrow account, as evidence that the money was the proceeds of illicit activity. He didn't run away with the money, he ran for his life. What about my father's death? Roberto Rocha did not die of a heart attack, sir. Ricardo hesitated before continuing. He was poisoned. And the only person who had access to both his office and his medications on the night of his death was Marcel. The silence that followed was deafening. Valentin felt as if he were floating outside his own body, watching his entire life crumble. Before his eyes, Marcel, his cousin, his business partner, the man he had trusted since his father's death, Marcel had killed Roberto Rocha. "There's more," Ricardo continued, pulling an audio recording from the envelope. "I got this through. A contact at the federal police. It's a conversation between Marcel and one of his henchmen recorded 3 weeks ago." Valentin picked up the device with trembling hands and pressed play. Marcel's voice echoed through the room, cold and calculating. "The girl is missing, but that's no problem. She serves our purposes better this way. Valentin is destroyed. He can't focus on business. In 6 months I'll be in full control of the company." "What if he finds out about the bet?" asked a second voice. "You won't find out, and even if you do, it doesn't matter. Eduardo's daughter has already fulfilled her role. Now it's just a matter of time until Valentin completely self-destructs." Valentin hung up the phone, his hands shaking with anger. "What bet?" Ricardo took another document out of the envelope. "Apparently, Marcel made a bet with you. If you could make Isabel fall in love and then disappear, you would receive control of the shares in the Aurora Casino. The plan was revenge against the Santos family for what Eduardo had done to the Rocha family. But I called off that bet," Valentin said, confused. "I told Marcel I was out of the deal." "Yes, but Marcel didn't accept the cancellation. In fact, he was the one who sought out Isabel and told her about the bet. He was the one who threatened her and forced her to flee." The revelation hit Valentin like a bullet to the chest. Marcel had sought out Isabel. He had told her about the bet, probably in a way that made it seem like it had all been a lie. He had purposely destroyed their relationship to get what he wanted. "Where is she?" Valentin asked, his voice dangerously low. "That's the tricky part, sir." Ricardo hesitated. "She's in a psychiatric clinic in Tiradentes, Minas Gerais, under a false name." "What do you mean hospitalized? What happened to her?" "Apparently, after leaving São Paulo, she went to the countryside to investigate her mother's death. She discovered evidence that Ana Santos was murdered for getting too close to the truth about her husband's disappearance. The discovery, added to the trauma of what happened to you, caused a severe nervous breakdown." Valentin stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Did she try to—" "We can't confirm it, but medical reports indicate that she was found in a state of shock in a roadside motel after an overdose of tranquilizers. It could have been accidental, it could have been—" Ricardo didn't finish the sentence. "How long has she been there?" 6 weeks. She's registered as Maria da Silva, no known relatives. The clinic is private, man. Someone is paying the bills." "Who?" "We're still investigating, but we suspect it's Marcel. A way to keep her away and controlled." Valentin felt a murderous rage rise in his chest. Marcel had not only destroyed his life, he had nearly destroyed Isabel as well, and now he was keeping her prisoner in a psychiatric clinic, probably on heavy medication, isolated from the world. "Get my car ready," Valentin said, already walking toward the door. "I'm going to Minas Gerais." "Mr. Rocha, perhaps it would be best to plan now, Ricardo, and also prepare a complete dossier on all of Marcel's crimes, enough evidence to put him in prison for the rest of his life." The drive to Tiradentes was the longest of Valentin's life. Every kilometer seemed like an eternity, every minute torture. He drove non-stop for 6 hours, his mind churning with anger, guilt, and a despair that grew with each passing moment. How had he been so blind? How had he trusted Marcel for so long? And most importantly, what state would he find Isabel in? The Santa Teresa Clinic was located in the mountains outside Tiradentes, an elegant and discreet complex where wealthy families admitted troubled relatives away from the eyes of society. Valentin arrived at dusk, when the mountains of Minas Gerais were bathed in the golden light of the sunset. "I came to visit Maria da Silva," he said to the receptionist, trying to keep his voice calm. "Are you a relative?" "Cousin," Valentin lied. "I was traveling and just found out she was here." After filling out paperwork and passing through security checks, Valentin was escorted down a long white hallway to an indoor garden where a few patients walked or read under the supervision of nurses. She was sitting alone on a bench, her back to him, looking out over a small pond where ducks were swimming peacefully. She was wearing a simple light blue dress, her brown hair longer than he remembered, loose around her shoulders. She looked thinner, more fragile, like a porcelain doll that could shatter at a touch. "Isabel," he said softly, approaching slowly. She turned slowly, and Valentin felt his heart shatter. Her eyes, which had once shone with intelligence and life, were empty, distant. There was an ethereal quality to her expression, as if she were seeing the world through a thick fog. "Hello," she said, her voice soft but emotionless. "Have you come to visit me?" Valentin leaned closer, studying her face. There was something wrong besides the obvious heavy medication. It was as if she was playing the role of a psychiatric patient, not genuinely being one. "It's me, Isabel. Valentin." She tilted her head as if trying to remember something distant. "Valentin, that name sounds familiar. We met in São Paulo. You worked at the library." "São Paulo." She repeated the words as if they were from a foreign language. "Yes, I lived there, before I got sick." Valentin sat down next to her on the bench, keeping a respectful distance. Something was very wrong. Isabel was one of the smartest people he knew. Even on heavy medication, she wouldn't be so vague. "Isabel, do you remember what happened? Why are you here?" She looked at him with those empty eyes. "The doctors say I had a psychotic break, that I tried to hurt myself, but I don't remember anything." A pause. "Did you know me well?" "Very well." Valentin tried to keep his voice steady. "We were close." "Close." She tested the word. "Does that mean you loved me?" The direct question hit him like a punch. "Yes. I loved you. I still do." Isabel studied him for a long moment, and for an instant Valentin thought he saw a flash of recognition in her eyes, but then she looked away. "The doctors say I can't trust my memories, that my mind has created fantasies to cope with the trauma." She stood up. "Maybe you're one of those fantasies." "Isabel, listen." Valentin stood up too, desperate. "I know you must be confused, but I need you to know the truth. About us, about what happened, about Marcel." At the mention of Marcel's name, Valentin saw Isabel shiver almost imperceptibly. It was subtle, but it was there. She remembered. "I don't know any Marcel," she said, but there was a new tension in her voice. "Yes, you do. He's the one who told you about the bet, the one who threatened you, the one who made you run away." Isabel turned to him sharply, and this time there was no denying it. Her eyes were completely alert, intelligent, furious. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but it was clearly a lie. "You're faking it," Valentin said, sudden understanding flooding his mind. "You're not sick. You're hiding it." Isabel quickly looked around, checking to see if there were any nurses nearby. When she saw that they were alone, her mask fell completely. "Of course I'm pretending," she hissed, her anger finally breaking through. "It's the only way to keep myself alive. Marcel has eyes everywhere. Here at least I'm safe." "Isabel." Valentin tried to get closer, but she backed away. "No." His words were laced with pain and fury. "You have no right to be here. Not after what you did." "I know about the bet," Valentin said desperately. "I know Marcel told you, but you need to know that I called it off, that I never meant to hurt you." "Cancelled?" Isabel laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless sound. "When? After you got what you wanted? After you made me fall in love with you?" "I called it off because I fell in love with you." Valentin took a step forward. "Because I realized you were more important than any revenge, any business, anything." "Liar." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "It was all a lie from the beginning." The donation to the library, the interest in the manuscripts, every kiss, every night together, it was all calculated. The beginning was calculated, yes, but then what? She exploded. Then you started feeling sorry for me. Then you decided that maybe you could have a little more fun before you discarded me. Then I fell madly in love with you, Valentine cried, his own composure finally breaking. Then you became the only real thing in my life. Then I realized I'd rather lose everything than lose you. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Isabel looked at him with tears streaming down her face, pain and anger fighting with something that looked dangerously like hope. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? She asked, her voice breaking. Why weren't you honest from the beginning? Because I'm a coward, Valentine admitted. Because I was afraid you'd run away. Because I knew I didn't deserve your love, but I was too selfish to let you go. Isabel wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Marcel told me everything. About the bet, about my father, about how you planned everything down to the smallest detail. He said you were laughing at me the whole time. Marcel is a liar and a murderer, Valentine said firmly. He killed my father, Isabel, and he probably killed your mother too. I know. Isabel's answer surprised him. That's what I discovered when I came to Minas. That's why I almost went really crazy. Valentine approached carefully. What did you discover? That my mother was investigating my father's death when she died. That she had found evidence that he hadn't stolen any money, that he was actually trying to expose a corruption scheme, and that Marcel had her killed to silence her. Why didn't you look for me? Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know. If you were involved. Isabel wiped away more tears. Because Marcel showed me recordings of you talking about me like I was just a pawn in a game. Because I thought you were just like him. Valentine felt like he had been shot. What recordings? You talking about how I was useful in getting information about the father, about how I was falling in love exactly as planned, about how it would be interesting to see how far I would go for love. The description made Valentine feel sick. Isabel, I never said those things. Marcel faked those recordings. How can I be sure? Her voice was small, vulnerable. How can I trust you again? Valentine took his phone out of his pocket and showed her the evidence Ricardo had collected. Because I have proof of everything. Of your father's innocence, of Marcel's crimes, of the truth about our parents' deaths. And because... He hesitated, knowing he was putting everything at risk. Because I came here to take you away. To protect you, even if you'll never forgive me. Isabel studied the documents with shaking hands. Valentine could see the exact moment. The truth crystallized in her mind, the anger, the confusion, the pain, all of it transforming into something new. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Marcel is still free, she said finally. Not for long. I have already handed over all the evidence to the federal police. He will be arrested before the end of the week. And then? Then, Valentine hesitated. Then it's up to you to decide. If you want me to disappear from your life forever, or if you want to give me a chance to earn your forgiveness. Isabel walked to the edge of the lake, watching the ducks swimming peacefully, oblivious to the human drama that was unfolding. Valentine waited, his heart hammering in his chest, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the rest of his life. You hurt me more than anyone has ever hurt me, she said without turning around. You made me fall in love with a lie. I know. It made me question everything I believed about love, about trust, about my own judgment. I know. It almost destroyed me completely. I know. Valentine's voice was thick with self-reproach. And I'll carry that guilt forever. Isabel finally turned to face him. But it also showed me what it's like to love someone completely, what it's like to give yourself body and soul, what it's like to find someone who understands your deepest scars. Valentine felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. The person. You were with me in the intimate moments when you dropped all the masks, Isabel continued. Was it real? More real than I've ever been with anyone else. And the feelings you showed? Every one of them true. Isabel nodded slowly. Then, maybe there's still something to save. Valentine took a step toward her, careful not to move too quickly. Isabel, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I broke your trust in a way that may never be fully repaired. But if you give me a chance, just one chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you mean more to me than anything. How can I trust again? You can't. Not yet. Valentine stopped a few feet away from her. But I can earn that trust back. Day by day, decision by decision, until you know without a shadow of a doubt that I choose you above all else. Isabel studied him for a long moment. I still love you, she finally said, the words coming out like a painful confession. I hate this, but I still love you, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. That doesn't make things any easier. I know. It might make it harder. I know that too. Isabel sighed, seeming to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. I'm leaving this clinic with you, but not because I've completely forgiven you. Because I need to see you face Marcel. I need to see you choose truth over family loyalty. I need to see if the man I love really exists, or if he was just another illusion. He exists, Valentine promised, and he will prove it to you. When they left the clinic that night, they were no longer the same passionate lovers who had parted months earlier. They were two wounded people, trying to find their way back to each other through the wreckage of broken trust. The love was still there, wounded but persistent. The question was whether it would be strong enough to survive the revelations that were yet to come. The trip back to São Paulo would be the first test, and in the days that followed, both Valentine and Isabel would discover whether some broken things can be fixed or whether they are destined to remain beautifully broken forever. The trip back to São Paulo was made in a silence full of tension and possibilities. Isabel was traveling in the passenger seat of Valentine's Porsche, looking out the window at the mountains of Minas Gerais that gave way to the plains of São Paulo, lost in thoughts that he didn't dare interrupt. There was so much to process, so many truths revealed, so many wounds still open and bleeding between them. Valentine drove carefully, occasionally watching her out of the corner of his eye. She looked fragile, but there was a new determination in her stance that hadn't been there at the clinic. It was as if the decision to return had rekindled something in her, not quite the woman he'd known, but someone stronger, tempered by the fires of betrayal and discovery. We need to talk about what we're going to do with Marcel, Isabel said. As they approached the outskirts of the capital, the evidence is already with the federal police, Valentine replied. He will be arrested in a matter of hours. It's not just about prison, Isabel turned to face him. It's about us. About how we're going to deal with all of this. Valentine slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange hues that contrasted with the gravity of the moment. Isabel, I know I can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal, he said, turning off the engine. I know I broke something precious between us. Yes, it did. She didn't try to soften the pain in her words. The question is whether we can build something new on the rubble. Do you want to try? Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, as if weighing her soul. I want to see you face Marcel first. I want to see you choose justice over family protection. I want to see if your actions match your words. What if they match? Then we'll talk about what happens next. They arrived in São Paulo when the city was already wrapped in its nocturnal blanket of lights and movement. Valentine took Isabel to his penthouse apartment, the intimate retreat where they had shared their first night together. She walked through the space like a stranger visiting a place she had only known in dreams. You can stay in the guest room, Valentine said, respecting the space she clearly needed. Thank you. Isabel gently touched a photograph he kept on the table, the two of them together at an art exhibit, smiling as if the world belonged to them. We look happy. We were happy. Valentine approached carefully. You were happy, even though it all started with a lie? Isabel considered the question seriously. The moments were real, even if the circumstances were fake. That's what makes it all the more complicated. Valentin's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Ricardo. "Mr. Rocha, we have news. Marcel was arrested 2 hours ago. He is at the Federal Police Headquarters, being interrogated. Do you want me to—" "I'm going there," Valentin said, hanging up the phone. "I'll go with you," Isabel said immediately. "I don't know if it's a good idea. I don't care if it's a good idea. I need to be there. I need to look into the eyes of the man who killed my mother." The Federal Police Headquarters was abuzz with activity when they arrived. Marcel had been arrested in his office, attempting to destroy evidence, and the operation had extended. To other members of the criminal organization, he ran from the shadows. The officer in charge, Dr. Henrique Montero, was a man of integrity, whom Valentin knew from other cases. He received them in his office, surrounded by piles of seized documents. "Mr. Rocha, I have to say that the evidence you have provided is overwhelming," Montero said. "Marcel has confessed to several crimes, including the murder of Roberto Rocha and Ana Santos." Isabel stepped forward. "Did he confess voluntarily?" "Not exactly. When faced with the evidence, especially some recordings we got from his house, he realized there was no way out." Montero looked at her with compassion. "I'm sorry for the loss of your mother, miss. We got evidence that she was killed because she was about to expose a corruption scheme that involved several authorities." "Can I talk to him?" Valentin asked. "I can arrange that, but are you sure? It might be difficult." Valentin looked at Isabel, who nodded determinedly. "We need to do this." Marcel was in the interrogation room, handcuffed, his expensive suit wrinkled and his hair disheveled. When he saw Valentin and Isabel enter accompanied by the police chief, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and defeat. "My dear cousin," Marcel said sarcastically, "did you bring your little girlfriend to watch me fall?" "I came for answers," Valentin replied, keeping his voice steady. "Why did you kill my father?" Marcel laughed, a bitter sound that echoed around the small room. "Your father was weak. He was about to confess everything, to destroy decades of work because of belated scruples. I couldn't allow it." "And Isabel's mother?" "Ana Santos was just like her husband, too curious, too determined. She discovered that Eduardo hadn't stolen anything, that he was actually trying to be a hero." Marcel looked directly at Isabel. "Your mother died because she didn't know when to stop digging." Isabel leaned across the table, her eyes burning with fury. "You destroyed my entire family." "Your family destroyed itself when Eduardo decided to grow a conscience." Marcel leaned back in his chair. "And now you two are going to find out that some victories cost more than you imagine." "What does that mean?" asked Valentin. "It means I wasn't the only one involved in this. It means there are very powerful people who won't like seeing their secrets exposed, people who will do anything to keep you quiet." Chief Montero stepped forward. "Mr. Marcel, any threat you make will be considered—" "It's not a threat," Marcel interrupted, smiling cruelly. "It's just a friendly warning. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, and now you're going to find out that some truths are too dangerous to come to light." By the time they left the police station, Isabel was visibly shaken. Seeing Marcel face to face, hearing his cold confession about her mother's death, had reopened wounds she thought had begun to heal. "He's right about one thing," she said as they sat in the car. "This isn't going to end with him being arrested." "I don't care," Valentin replied. "We'll face whatever comes together." "Together?" Isabel looked at him with an unreadable expression. "Do you still think there's a together for us?" Valentin pulled the car into a parking lot and turned to face her fully. "Isabel, I know I have no right to ask this, but you see, I chose you. I chose the truth. I turned my own cousin over to the police, knowing it would destroy the empire my family had built. You did what was right. I did what was right for you, for us." Valentin hesitated. "Does that mean anything?" Isabel was silent for a long moment, looking out the windows at the city that spread out around them. São Paulo was pulsing with nightlife, millions of people living their own stories of love, betrayal, forgiveness, and new beginnings. "It means you're capable of change," she said finally. It means that maybe the man I fell in love with really does exist. He exists, and he's willing to spend the rest of his life proving it. Valentine. Isabel turned to him, tears shining. In her eyes, I want to believe so badly it hurts, but I don't know if I can. Then let me show you. Valentine held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Let me earn your trust back day by day. What if I can never fully trust again? So let's build something new. Something that doesn't depend on blind trust, but on absolute transparency. In the weeks that followed, Valentine did just that. Isabel moved back into his apartment, but they saw each other daily. He opened his life completely to her, business, bank accounts, relationships, decisions. There were no more secrets, no more forbidden areas. Isabel, for her part, was learning to know him again. The man who had fallen in love with her really existed, but now she saw him completely, his virtues and faults, his strengths and weaknesses, his capacity for both good and evil. Rebuilding was not easy. There were arguments, tears, moments when Isabel almost gave up. There were nights when Valentine woke up from nightmares, tormented by the guilt of what he had done. There were days when they both questioned whether love was enough to overcome such betrayal. But there were also moments of unexpected beauty, deep conversations about pain and forgiveness, hesitant laughter that gradually became more natural, careful touches that slowly turned into intimate caresses. The turning point came 2 months after Marcel's arrest. Isabel was cataloguing some of Valentine's family's personal manuscripts, documents he had insisted she examine as part of his policy of total transparency, when she found something that changed everything. It was a letter from Roberto, Rocha to Valentine, written shortly before his death, a letter that Marcel had hidden for years. "My son," the letter read, "if anything happens to me, I want you to know the truth about our business dealings. I have discovered that Marcel has been using our company for activities that go against everything I believe in. I have tried to confront him, but he has become dangerous. Eduardo Santos is not our enemy. He is an honest man who has tried to help us clear our name. If anything happens to me, please seek out his daughter. She may have the answers we need." Isabel read the letter 3 times before calling Valentin. When he arrived and saw the document, his eyes filled with tears. "My father knew," he said, his voice breaking. "He wanted me to find you." "Not for revenge," Isabel said softly. "For justice." That night, for the first time in months, they made love. It wasn't the desperate passion of before, but something deeper, a union of 2 souls who had been through hell and found their way back to each other. Afterwards, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Valentine talked about the future. "I want to change everything," he said. "The business, the company, our life. I want to build something clean, something we can be proud of. That will mean giving up a lot of power, a lot of money. I don't care. I'd rather have less of everything and have you than have an empire built on lies." Isabel propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "Are you sure? Because there's no going back. If we do this, if we really clean house, we're going to have powerful enemies. Then we'll face it together." Valentine gently touched her face. "Are you with me?" "I'm with you." The process of restructuring Rocha's company took almost a year. Valentine sold the illegal casinos, shut down the questionable operations, and cooperated with federal investigations. He lost most of his fortune, keeping only the completely legal businesses. Isabel returned to work at the library, but now as director of a new project funded by Valentine's restructured company, a historical preservation center that specialized in documenting human rights crimes during Brazil's military dictatorship. There were attempts at intimidation, political pressure, veiled threats. But they faced it all together, their unity growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Marcel was sentenced to 30 years in prison for aggravated murder, criminal association, and active corruption. Several politicians and businessmen involved in the scheme were also arrested. The network of corruption that had destroyed so many families had finally collapsed. 2 years after their reunion at the clinic, Valentin proposed to Isabelle in a way that only he could. He recreated the first manuscript she had restored in the library, handwriting on antique paper a love letter that told their entire story, the mistakes, the pain, the redemption, the love that had survived it all. "This is our story," he said, kneeling in the same basement of the library where they had first met. "With all the chapters, the dark ones and the light ones. Will you write the next ones with me?" Isabelle read the entire letter before replying, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked at him, her eyes shining with love and something she had fought so hard to rebuild, trust. "Yes," she said, "but on one condition. Any one. That you promise that there will never be secrets between us again, that if something goes wrong, if there is trouble, that you will come to me instead of trying to protect me with lies." "I promise, Valentine," said, sliding the engagement ring, a simple design with diamonds that symbolized the tears they had shed and the light they had found, onto her finger. They were married 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the interior of Minas Gerais, near where Isabelle was born. It was a complete new beginning, far from the shadows of the past, surrounded only by people who truly loved them. During their honeymoon at a romantic inn in Chapada Diamantina, Isabelle found Valentine writing in a notebook on the balcony, watching the golden sunset over the Bahian mountains. "What are you writing?" she asked, settling down beside him. "A letter for our daughter," he replied, placing his hand on Isabelle's still flat belly. "Daughter?" she laughed. "How do you know it's going to be a girl?" "Intuition," Valentine smiled. "And hope. I want her to grow up knowing that it is possible to start over, that it is possible to turn a story of pain into a story of love. What if it's a boy? Then he will learn that a real man protects the one he loves with the truth, not with lies." Isabelle took the notebook and read the first lines. "My dear daughter, your parents met in a library, surrounded by old stories. He was a lost man, she was a wounded woman, and together they discovered that the best stories are those we think are over, but are actually just beginning a new chapter." "Our happy ending wasn't easy," Isabelle said, handing back the notebook. "The best endings never are," Valentine replied, gently kissing her lips, "but they are the only ones worth it." 5 years later, when his daughter Helena was born, named after the great-grandmother who had fought for justice decades earlier, Valentin finished the letter he had started on their honeymoon. The last line read, "True love is not the kind that never weathers the storm, my daughter. It is the kind that chooses to rebuild after the storm has passed." Isabelle and Valentine built an empire unlike the one they had inherited, a legacy based on truth, justice, and redemption. Their businesses thrived because they were ethical. Their family grew because it was built on absolute trust. And their love story became the stuff of legend because it proved that some broken things can be fixed, if only people are willing to do the hard work of rebuilding. Years later, when Helena asked about how her parents met, Isabelle always said the same thing: "It started with a lie, my dear, but it turned into the most beautiful truth I have ever experienced." And Valentine always added, "Your mother taught me that love is not about possessing, it is about choosing, and I choose her every day, from the moment we wake up until the moment we fall asleep. That is the only bet worth making in life." In the library where it all began, now run by a foundation named after Ana Santos, a plaque in the basement marked the spot where 2 broken hearts found healing in each other. The inscription read simply, "Some stories begin with lies, but the best ones end with truth. Eduardo Santos, 1960-1995, Ana Santos, 1962-2005, Roberto Rocha, 1955-2005. May their deaths not have been in vain." And so, between ancient manuscripts and new possibilities, Isabelle and Valentine wrote their own story, one that began in the shadows but blossomed in the light, one that proved that true love is not perfect but is persistent, and that some of life's riskiest bets are the ones we make with our hearts. The ending came not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with the powerful simplicity of 2 people choosing to stay together after losing everything and finding something even more valuable, themselves and each other, completely honestly forever.